In 1934, a miner's wife in Timmins got up at 4:30 in the morning and made the same breakfast she had made every day for 3 years. Bread fried in lard, black tea, and a spoon of molasses if the week had been good. Her husband walked 6 kilometers to the mine on that. Today, a nutritionist would call it a disaster. But number 7 on this list was eaten by loggers from British Columbia to New Brunswick for over a century, and sports scientists now recognize the exact metabolic principle behind it. Number 3 kept prairie farmers working through minus 30 mornings so effectively that endurance athletes quietly use the same principle today. And number 14 was something food companies spent decades convincing Canadians to stop eating, because it made one of their most profitable products completely unnecessary. These 25 breakfasts were eaten because they were cheap, fast, and they worked. We forgot them the moment we could afford to. Hit subscribe. Let us count down. A farm wife cut thick slabs from a homemade loaf, pressed them into a pan of hot lard, and fried both sides until the crust crackled and the center steamed. The lard cost nothing because nothing was wasted. The bread cost 3 cents a loaf to make at home. The whole breakfast for a family of 6 took 10 minutes. In farm kitchens from Saskatchewan to Prince Edward Island, fried bread was not a treat. It was Tuesday. Number 24, porridge with bacon drippings. Not oatmeal with cream and maple syrup. Rolled oats cooked in salted water, finished with a spoonful of bacon drippings stirred through while still hot. On the prairies, in the 1930s, a 50-pound bag of oats cost 40 cents and fed a family breakfast for 2 months. The drippings came from the jar beside the stove, filled a spoonful at a time from every rasher ever fried. In Mennonite communities in Manitoba and Ukrainian settlements in Alberta, this was served 7 days a week. Men working 16-hour harvest days swore nothing else kept hunger away until noon. Number 23, milk toast. A bowl, 2 slices of yesterday's bread torn into pieces, hot milk poured over, a pinch of salt. In Cape Breton mining families through the 1930s and the 1940s, this appeared every morning when the pay had not come in. The bread softened until it turned into something between porridge and soup. Some mothers added a dusting of sugar when the week was good. Either way, the bowl was empty in 3 minutes, and the children were out the door. Cornmeal boiled in salted water until thick, poured out to set overnight, then sliced and fried in the morning until both sides crusted golden. It was drizzled with corn syrup or spread with lard and salt. It carried a man through 4 hours of hard labor. Cornmeal cost 15 cents a pound in the 1940s. In lumber camps from the Ottawa Valley to interior British Columbia, the cook started the mush the night before as a matter of routine. Salt pork fat, trimmings fried down until they crisped into crackling pieces, swimming in rendered fat. The fat went over bread, the scraps went into a bowl. That was breakfast in Newfoundland outport kitchens, Quebec logging camps, and Northern Ontario trapper shacks. A slab of salt pork cost 12 cents a pound and lasted weeks in a cold cellar. The men who ate this before heading onto the water or into the bush were not eating for pleasure. They were loading calories the same way you load a stove with wood. Number 20, oatmeal water. Not porridge, water. Thin oatmeal gruel made by simmering a handful of oats in a full pot of water until barely thickened. During the Depression years in Saskatchewan and Alberta, whole families survived on this because there was no milk, no fat, and no fuel for anything more. It appears in the diaries of relief camp workers from 1932 and 1933. Nobody calls it a recipe. It was a measure of how far things had fallen. First pattern break. Bannock. Every First Nations community across this country knew it. Scottish fur traders brought a version. Métis families adapted it over 2 centuries into something entirely their own. Flour, baking powder, salt, water or lard. Mixed in the hand, patted flat, fried in a pan. 4 minutes to mix, 15 minutes to cook. In Cree communities in northern Manitoba, in Ojibwe, households around Lake of the Woods, in Métis kitchens along the Red River, bannock was on the table before the sun was fully up. Modern sports nutritionists studying sustained energy output have noted that high-fat, low-sugar, slow-burning carbohydrate combinations, exactly what bannock with lard provides, outperform processed breakfast cereals on work output over a 4-hour window. The people who relied on bannock before dawn did not need a study. They needed to get through the day. Number 18, fried bologna. Before it became a lunchbox punchline, bologna was serious protein for serious budgets. A whole ring cost 25 cents. Cut thick, pressed into a hot pan until the edges curled and the center blistered, eaten on bread with mustard or straight from the pan. Mine workers in Sudbury, shift workers at the steel plants in Sydney, rail workers in Transcona, these men ate fried bologna before dawn without thinking twice. The smell of it hitting a hot, dry pan is so specific to that era, people who grew up in those households say the scent alone brings back an entire childhood. Number 17, potato hash. Sunday's leftover boiled potatoes, diced and pressed into a hot skillet with onion and pan fat, fried until the bottom crisped dark. Not the restaurant kind with peppers and herbs. The kind made from cold potatoes at 5 in the morning. In Quebec farm kitchens, this was called patates rissolées and appeared every Monday without fail. Nothing from Sunday was wasted. Children poured ketchup over their portion and ate fast before the school bus came. Number 16, hard bread and molasses. In Newfoundland, it was not called a poor man's breakfast. It was just breakfast. Hard bread spread with blackstrap molasses from the barrel at the general store was washed down with tea strong enough to stand a spoon in. Molasses cost 15 cents a quart, and it lasted for weeks. The combination of slow-burning carbohydrate and iron-dense blackstrap provided more actual nutrition than most people realize. Fishing families in Twillingate and Bonavista ate this in the dark before heading out onto waters that could kill them. Number 15, rolled oats raw with milk. No cooking, no heat. A bowl of dry rolled oats, cold milk poured over, left to soak for 2 minutes while you pulled on your coat. Prairie women who had already been up stoking the fire and getting children dressed could not always stand at the stove. Cold oats in milk took no fire and no watching. Today, it is marketed in health food stores as overnight oats and sold for $7 a jar. Your grandmother called it not bothering to cook. Second pattern break, cracklings. The controversy. When a pig was butchered in the fall, the fat was rendered into lard. What remained in the pot were cracklings, crispy golden pieces of rendered pork skin, salted and eaten warm with bread. They were the harvest breakfast in farm communities from Ontario to Alberta, and they cost nothing because they were a byproduct of a process already happening. But in 1961, a major advertising campaign by shortening manufacturers specifically targeted lard and cracklings as primitive and unclean, and positioned their hydrogenated vegetable product as the modern, healthy choice. It worked. Within a decade, the fall pig slaughter had faded from most rural communities, and the lard pot went with it. What replaced cracklings? Puffed grain cereals made in factories. The cereal companies sold Canadians on the idea that a box of processed grain was more wholesome than food their family had made themselves for 200 years. We believe them. Number 13, PEA soup for breakfast. In Quebec, this needs no explanation. Yellow pea soup, thick with salt pork, simmered overnight on the back of the wood stove, ladled into a bowl at 6 in the morning before the men went to the fields. The pot was always on. A single batch fed the household for 3 days. In the logging camps of the Laurentians, pea soup appeared for breakfast, dinner, and supper in rotation without apology. Number 12, bread soaked in bacon fat. Not fried, soaked Day-old bread pushed flat into the warm fat left in the pan after the morning's bacon, soaked on both sides until it absorbed the grease completely. In Cape Breton and the mill towns of northern New Brunswick, children got the bacon-soaked bread and fathers got the bacon. The bread tasted of smoke and pork and salt in a way nothing else replicated. Not a drop was left in the pan. Number 11, tea and toast over an open burner. Not the tea and toast of a polite Canadian kitchen. Tea, nearly opaque with strength, and toast made on a fork held over an open gas burner, pulled back black at the edges, spread with lard if there was no butter. In rooming houses in Montreal and Toronto through the 1940s and the 1950s, men who worked the overnight shift came home at 6 in the morning and ate this over a newspaper before sleeping until noon. It cost almost nothing. It asked almost nothing. For a man who had been on his feet since midnight, it was enough. Salt cod soaked overnight, broken into flakes, then fried with cold boiled potatoes and onion until the edges crisped and the whole thing turned golden. It was called fish and brewis in some variations, fish hash in others, and simply breakfast in the houses where it needed no name. Salt cod could be kept without refrigeration for months. The smell of it hitting a hot pan at 5 in the morning drifted through entire neighborhoods in Lunenburg, Yarmouth, and Harbor Grace. Number 9, corn syrup bread. In the 1880s, companies began marketing corn syrup as a cheap substitute for molasses in working-class Canadian households. By the 1920s, golden corn syrup was being spread on bread for breakfast across the country. It cost 4 cents a tin. Here is what nobody talked about. Corn syrup is approximately 75% fructose, the specific sugar that does not trigger the hormone telling your brain you are full. Families who spread corn syrup on bread at breakfast were hungry again within an hour. Workers who ate molasses and lard, the slower burning older combinations, stayed satisfied until midday. Food historians who have studied this shift note a corresponding increase in workers buying company store food at lunch. Cheap sugar made hungry people. Hungry people bought more food. The math worked for everyone except the man spreading corn syrup on bread at 5 in the morning, wondering why his stomach was growling again by 9. Number 8, rolled oats fried in a cake. Leftover cooked oatmeal from the night before, patted into a flat cake, and fried hard in a dry pan until both sides crisp dark. The outside became almost cracker hard. The inside stayed dense and chewy, eaten with maple syrup in Ontario or Quebec, or eaten with salt alone on the prairies. Every culture that landed in Canada and had to feed a family on very little eventually invented this. It costs nothing. It asks only that you plan ahead the night before. Number 7, lard on bread with salt. No dressing it up. White bread baked at home, a spoonful of lard from the crock, spread like butter, salt shaken over. In the Dust Bowl years of the 1930s, when Saskatchewan and Alberta families had nothing left, this was what appeared on the table before school. A woman named Mabel Thiessen, who grew up outside Moose Jaw during the Depression, wrote in her memoir that she ate lard and salt bread every morning for 2 years. She was not hungry, she was not sick, and she passed all her grades. She wrote it without self-pity, just the facts. Ground wheat or ground oats were boiled until completely smooth and enriched with whatever fat was in the kitchen. It was fed to children from 6 months old and eaten by adults through the Depression, because it cost almost nothing and produced no waste. This thickened mush was the baseline morning meal of the Canadian poor for 2 centuries. In 1931, doctors at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto invented pablum, a pre-cooked, enriched grain product, and within a decade, the homemade version had vanished from middle-class tables. In the poorest households, it continued, because pablum cost money and ground oats cost almost none. 4th pattern break. Number 5, the logging camp breakfast. It had no name that stuck. The camp cook was up at 3:30 in the morning to have breakfast ready before the men went out. What appeared on the table was always enormous and always anchored in fat and starch: fried salt pork, a pot of baked beans warmed from the night before, biscuits or bannock, fried potatoes, black tea by the gallon. Men loaded their plates twice before going into cold that would kill you if you stopped moving. The specific ratio of slow-burning fat to complex carbohydrate in a camp breakfast, the combination that kept a man swinging an axe for 4 hours in -20, is almost exactly the macronutrient profile now recommended for sustained cold weather athletic performance. The logging camp cook did not know the science. He knew that men who ate well in the morning did not lose their fingers to cold. Number 4, bread and beans. Cold baked beans from the pot, spooned onto bread and eaten standing at the counter. Not a clever recipe. It was what you did when there was nothing else and the shift started in 20 minutes. The pot of Quebec pork and beans was always on, simmered since Saturday, still good Monday morning. Bean breakfasts appear in the food diaries of relief workers from the 1930s, miners from the 1940s, and shift workers from the 1950s. Beans are protein, fiber, and slow carbohydrate. Eating them cold on bread at 6 in the morning was not sad. It was smart. Number 3, oatmeal with drippings and brown sugar. Oatmeal was cooked in salted water, then a spoon of beef or bacon drippings was stirred in while it was hot, and a pinch of brown sugar was sprinkled over the top. The fat cut the stickiness and made the oats slide smooth. The salt balanced the sugar. The whole bowl tasted rich and filling in a way plain oatmeal never matched. This appeared in Scottish immigrant households in Ontario and Cape Breton, and in Irish settlements in Newfoundland, carried from the old country and kept alive for generations. Modern endurance athletes who study traditional working-class diets note that oats enriched with saturated fat and a small amount of sugar produce a longer, flatter blood sugar curve than oats with refined sugar alone. The people who invented this breakfast just needed to work all day without stopping. Number 2, bannock with lard and salt. Not sweet bannock, not bannock with jam, but the working version. Made in a cold kitchen before light, shaped by hand in 3 minutes, pressed into a hot pan of lard, flipped once, eaten broken apart, and dipped in the remaining pan fat while still too hot to hold. This is the breakfast that crossed the country with the fur trade, fed the surveyors who mapped the railway, sustained the families who broke the prairie sod, and kept warm in the hands of trappers, fishers, and miners for over 200 years. Flour, baking powder, salt, fat, nothing else. It could be made in a bush camp, in a drafty cabin, in a tent at 40 below. Lard and bannock before dawn. Then work. Number 1, tea, bread, and drippings. 3 things. Black tea brewed strong. A thick slice of homemade bread. The dripping jar kept beside the stove. Spread over the bread while standing. This was the breakfast of the men who built the railroads, dug the mines, pulled the fish, and raised the cities. It appears in letters from Ukrainian homesteaders in Manitoba in 1910, in diaries of Cape Breton miners in 1935, and in oral histories of Newfoundland outport families in 1948. Their grandchildren remember their grandparents eating bread and drippings in the morning. They assumed it was a sign of poverty and forgot to ask what it tasted like. It tasted like salt and smoke and warmth. It tasted like the thing you ate before you went out into the Canadian cold and made something of a day. It is gone from most tables now, not because it stopped working, because we could afford something shinier. Call the oldest person in your family and ask them what they ate before the shift, before school, before the bus. Ask them about the fat jar beside the stove and the bread that had to last the week. Tell me in the comments which one your family ate. I want to know if the fried bologna people outnumber the bread and drippings people. These were not failures of poverty. They were the knowledge of people who could not afford to waste a single morning.